Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The rumble of the subway echoed through the dimly lit tunnels as Jack Arden eased the controls forward, his fingers gripping the worn leather handle. The train hummed, picking up speed, the familiar vibration, a comfort in the otherwise lifeless underground world. Jack's eyes flicked to the tunnel ahead, barely illuminated by the train's headlight. For most of Subterra, the vast subterranean city, this was normal, endless tunnels, cold concrete walls, and the soft glow of artificial light. But for Jack, the darkness carried weight, a silent reminder of the world that once was. He glanced at the small globe tucked into the corner of his control panel. It was old, its paint chipped, continents faded from years of wear. Jack found it in a relic shop years ago, when relics from the surface still held value, before people accepted that Earth's surface was gone forever. Gone, they said, uninhabitable, a wasteland. Jack shifted in his seat as the train sped through the tunnel, its steady clatter the only sound. His passengers were quiet, some dozing in their seats, others staring blankly at the wall. Life underground had dulled their senses, crushed their hope. He understood, after all, they'd been told for years that nothing remained above but a toxic shell of what Earth used to be. Yet Jack never quite accepted it. Maybe it was stubbornness, maybe it was curiosity. Either way, something about the story didn't sit right with him. He heard the tales growing up, the endless storms, the acidic air, the sunless sky. But there were gaps in the story. Whispers among the older generations that things hadn't ever been so simple. Whispers that the surface end's downfall wasn't nature's and but something man-made. Jack shook his head. Speculation wouldn't get him anywhere. He had a job to do, and in Subterra, a job was survival. As the train coasted into the next station, the hum of its brakes pulling the metal beast to a stop, Jack scanned the platform. Sparse, like always, a few commuters hurried onto the train, heads down, eager to get back to their zones, their tiny, cramped lives. Jack hardly noticed them anymore. They all blended into one, the lifeless masses trapped beneath the earth. The doors slid shut with a metallic thud, and Jack moved the train forward, the monotony of his route settling back over him like a familiar blanket. The tunnel stretched out before him, dark and endless, its walls narrowing as the train descended further into the deep. Suddenly, the lights flickered. Jack straightened in his seat, hands tightening on the control. The train's systems were usually rock solid, especially in these deeper tunnels. When the lights flickered again, Jack felt a pang of unease. He tapped the communication panel, but all he got in return was static. Frowning, he adjusted the frequency, trying to reach the control center. Control, this is line 7. Approaching Sector 5, where Van got power fluctuation, requesting status update. Static. Jack's heart thudded in his chest. He tapped the panel again, but the static persisted. Then from the depths of the radio, a garbled transmission crackled through like a voice buried under layers of distortion. Unauthorized access rerouting danger. Jack's pulse quickened. The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving him in dead silence, save for the rattling of the train on the track. He eased the throttle back, slowing the train. The darkness outside seemed to deepen, the lights flickering more violently now, casting eerie shadows along the wall. He couldn't stop the train. In the middle of the tunnel, it was against protocol, but something in his gut told him to be cautious. The lights dimmed again, and this time, they didn't come back on. The train coasted to a halt, the emergency lights kicking in with a dim red glow. Jack stared out into the darkness, his breath quickening. This was far deeper than most trains went. Few people even ventured out this way anymore, but as Jack peered into the shadows, he saw something. A faint glimmer. He hesitated, then stood, grabbing the small flashlight from his toolkit. The passengers remained seated, most of them oblivious, too accustomed to the occasional blackout. Jack opened the door to the conductor salon and stepped into the cold air of the tunnel. The flashlight beam cut through the thick darkness, revealing damp concrete walls and the endless steel tracks stretching ahead. Jack's boots echoed softly as he stepped forward, the hairs on the back of his neck prickling. Something was off. He could feel it. As he rounded the bend, the beam of his flashlight fell on a large metal door set into the wall. Jack frowned. This section of the tunnel wasn't supposed to have any maintenance access point. He had the route memorized after years of driving it, but this door, this was new, unmarked, rusted, and sealed with an imposing steel lock. Curiosity gnawed at him. Jack approached the door, running his fingers along its surface. Faint markings were etched into the metal, barely visible in the low light. He crouched down, shining the light closer. The markings were old, faded, but they were there. Classified, he whispered under his breath. A chill ran down his spine. Classified. What was classified this deep in Subterra? Jack stood, glancing around the tunnel. No one was supposed to know about this, yet here it was, hidden in plain sight. Suddenly, a low hum filled the air. Jack whipped around, his flashlight beam darting into the darkness. From the shadows, a figure emerged, tall, clad in dark armor, face obscured by a helmet. It was Isaac, the watchman. Jack had seen him before, patrolling the deeper tunnels, keeping people away from restricted areas. Isaac's voice, cold and mechanical, cut through the silence. This area is off limits, Arden. Jack tensed. You weren't supposed to see this, Isaac interrupted, his tone flat, emotionless. Return to your train. Jack's mind raced. He knew better than to argue with the watchmen. They answered only to the Subterra government, and crossing them could mean disappearance, permanent disappearance. But something about the door, about the flickering lights, felt wrong. The secrets buried down here, he had to know. Isaac took a step closer, the hum of his suit amplifying the tension in the air. Jack swallowed hard, backing away. Fine, he muttered, turning on his heel and walking briskly back to the train. But as he re-entered the cabin, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that he was onto something big. The train lurched back to life, the lights returning as if nothing had happened. Jack sat heavily in his seat, staring at the control panel. The passengers were still lost in their own worlds, unaware of the encounter that had just taken place. But Jack couldn't let it go. That door, those markings, the watchman, sudden appearance. There was something going on down here, something far beyond his understanding. He had to find out what. Jack's shift ended like it always did, quietly, uneventfully. His replacement arrived, and he offered a brief nod before heading off through the dim tunnels toward his living quarters. Subterra was always alive with people, but it felt dead to him. Jack walked the narrow corridors, his mind churning, trying to piece together the oddities of the night. The classified door, Isaac's abrupt appearance, it was no coincidence. There was something down here, something the authorities didn't so want anyone to find. And he was sure it was connected to the end of the surface world. Back in his small apartment, Jack tossed his jacket over a chair and sat heavily at the edge of his bed, his hands buried in his face. The globe on his nightstand seemed to mock him, the faded continents a distant dream. He knew he couldn't stop thinking about that door, not until he knew what was behind it. A knock at his door startled him. Jack frowned. No one ever visited him. His life was solitary by design. He stood and opened the door cautiously. A woman stood in the hallway, her dark hair pulled back tightly, her eyes sharp and calculating. She wore a long coat that reached her ankles, hiding her frame beneath layers of fabric. But it wasn't her appearance that set Jack on edge. It was the intensity in her gaze, as though she'd been watching him for some time. Jack Arden, she asked, her voice low and serious. Who's asking? The woman stepped into the light of the doorway. My name is Dr. Evelyn Royce. We need to talk. Jack hesitated. That name, it was familiar. He'd heard it before long ago, but he couldn't place where. Before he could question her further, she stepped past him into the apartment, her eyes scanning the small space, as if checking for listening devices. What do you want? Jack asked, closing the door behind her. His instincts told him she was dangerous, but his curiosity pushed him to let her stay. You saw something tonight, something you weren't supposed to see, she said, her voice calm but laced with urgency. Jack stiffened. I don't know what you were talking about. Don't you play dumb, Jack? That classified door, Isaac, the whole setup. You stumbled into something big, and if you were not careful, it's going to get you killed. Jack's heart pounded in his chest. He hadn't told anyone about the door, and yet this woman, this stranger, knew everything. How do you know about that? Dr. Royce took a deep breath. Because I used to work for the Subterra government. I was a part of the project that caused the surface to become uninhabitable. Jack's mouth went dry. The project, you mean the natural disaster? She shook her head, her eyes darkening. It wasn't a natural disaster, Jack. It was a controlled experiment, one that went horribly wrong. Jack couldn't believe what he was hearing for his entire life. He'd been told that the surface world was destroyed by unstoppable environmental forces, storms, acid rain, plagues of radiation, but now this woman was telling him it had all been a lie. Wait, you were saying the surface did to just die on its own? Dr. Royce nodded. Years ago, there was a program designed to manipulate the Earth's climate. It was meant to reverse the damage we'd done to bring balance back to the atmosphere. But it didn't go as planned. Instead of stabilizing the climate, the experiment triggered a cascade of events that turned the surface into a wasteland. Jack's mind raced. But why hide it? Why not just tell people? The people responsible couldn't afford the truth to come out. Admitting failure on such a colossal scale would have led to riots, chaos. So they lied. They told the population that the world was lost to natural causes, and they moved everyone underground. Subterra was supposed to be temporary, but it became permanent the moment they sealed the truth. Jack stared at her, his chest tightening. And you were a part of this. I was, she admitted, but I didn't know how far it went until it was too late. By the time I learned the truth, I was already in too deep. I couldn't just leave. No one leaves Subterra without consequences. Jack felt a surge of anger his whole life. He lived under the belief that there was no other option, that humanity was doomed to survive in this concrete prison forever. So what now? You're just telling me all this? Why? Because I need your help, Dr. Roy said, her tone softening. I've been trying to expose the truth for years, but I can't do it alone. I need someone who knows the tunnels, someone who can get me to the place where the evidence is stored, the vault. The vault, Jack repeated. What the hell is that? It sounds where all the data from the experiment is stored, records, logs, everything. The problem is, it's deep underground in a restricted zone, only accessible through the subway tunnel. I've been trying to find a way in for years, but I need a driver, someone like you, to get me there. Jack clenched his fists. He didn't know what to think. The weight of everything she was saying pressed down on him, like a fight. But at the same time, it made sense. All the secrecy, the patrols, Isaac's cold warnings, there was something they were hiding. And if she was telling the truth, he couldn't just sit by and do nothing. All right, Jack said finally, I'll help you. But if this goes sideways, it won't, Dr. Royce promised. We'll be careful. The next day, Jack began his routine as normal, but now he had a plan. Dr. Royce had given him coordinates to an abandoned station where they would start their journey to the vault. The deeper tunnels were rarely used anymore, and if they were lucky, they could slip past the watchmen unnoticed. As the train rattled through the empty tunnels, Jack's mind raced. The passengers were few today, most of them too absorbed in their own hollow lives to notice anything unusual. Jack glanced at his reflection in the train's front window, wondering if he was making a mistake. But then he thought about the lies, the years of falsehoods, the hidden truths buried beneath Subterra. He had to see this through. The train reached the designated stop, an old disused platform that hadn't seen activity in decades. Jack stopped the train and waited until the last of the passengers disembarked. He was alone now, just him and the truth that waited in the darkness. Dr. Royce was already waiting when he arrived. Standing at the far end of the platform, her coat pulled tight around her. Are you ready? She asked. Jack nodded, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Together, they boarded the train, and Jack guided it down a disused line that veered off from the main system. The tunnel grew darker, the air colder as they descended deeper into the unknown. As they traveled, Jack glanced at Dr. Royce, who was lost in thought. What happens if we get caught? He asked quietly. Dr. Royce's expression was grim. If we get caught, we won. Make it out of Subterra alive. The train continued to hurtle through the darkness, the walls narrowing as they went deeper into forbidden territory. Jack's stomach churned with unease. They were entering the bowels of Subterra now, the places where few dared to go. The lights flickered sporadically, casting eerie shadows on the walls, and the sound of the train tusked wheels echoed like thunder. Suddenly, the radio crackled to life. Jack's heart skipped a beat as a familiar, cold voice filtered through the static. Unauthorized entry detected. Return to the main line immediately. It was Isaac. Jack's hands tightened on the controls. He looked at Dr. Royce, who shook her head. Don't stop, she said. We were almost there. Jack pressed forward, the train speeding up as the tunnel stretched out before them, but Isaac's voice came again, more insistent. This time. Turn back now. Are you re-entering restricted territory? The tension in the cabin was palpable. Jack knew he was in too deep to stop now. He couldn't truly go back, not after everything they uncovered. He had to know the truth. As they neared the vault, the tunnel opened into a wide chamber, the tracks leading to a massive fortified door. Jack brought the train to a stop, the brakes hissing in the cold air. They had arrived. But as they stepped out of the train, a shadow moved in the corner of Jack's vision. Isaac had followed them. He was here.